action.
Hello, everybody. I'm Shane Adamson, and today's sponsor, but not really a sponsor, but I'm just making them a sponsor, is the Chi Machine. And I don't know if you guys know about the Chi Machine or not. Brandon knows about the Chi Machine.
Many people might not even know about Chi.
They might not know about Chi.
Maybe you want to explain what Chi is.
That's a great idea. So, in one of my previous videos, this thing is so heavy. But yeah, Sarah Rosbach, she is amazing, and she's wrote the Bible, quote unquote. I do air quotes for you guys right now, but I can't, obviously. She definitely explores Qi a lot in that, because that's a huge component of the Chinese art of placement. And essentially what Qi is it's an energy that runs through your body at all times. It definitely has a lot of science behind it, and for instance, they've actually measured meridians in your body. You guys might know what meridians are. Acupuncturists and masseuses and chiropractors even, but mainly acupuncturists use meridians when they're doing acupuncture on you. And they've measured those meridians through some sort of scientific scan. It's either an MRI or EKG. I think it's an EKG, where they're actually able to see those meridians inside of the body, and when acupuncturists would place those needles at certain juncture points, if you will, they could see that energy moving through the body, literally on a scan. So what used to be something that was thought of as new agey and woo-woo and not very sciencey has actually become sort of mainstream and has been proven by science now. Which brings me to the Chi Machine. This bad boy right here. How much can you see of this, Brandon?
You should hold it up more if you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this bad boy, this is the original. This is a high-flying, genuine article original Chi Machine that you want. And it's from Sun Ankan is the company. And I'll link to the description below, a link where you guys can go check this bad boy out. But it's amazing. You lay down, you put your ankles in these ankle slots here, and you turn it on, and you start out with 2 minutes, and it's the best 2 minutes of your life. You know, this is actually a patented medical device. So it's patented in Japan, it's patented in Australia, and it's patented in the UK, and I want to say it's patented here in the US, but I'd have to double check on that. So it is a legit thing, and it's mainly used for people with all sorts of ailments, but it's mainly used for the lymphatic system, and it also helps people with their cardiovascular system as well. 15 minutes on this equals 90 minutes brisk walk, so you can kind of get like this. This is what I do for all my cardio, honestly, unless I'm like really wanting to cardio up, and then I go do frog legs on the bike or whatever. But 15 minutes on this, yeah, you get your walk in, you get your exercise in, and you get your cardio in. So that way you just don't have to be bored doing cardio, because cardio might be one of the most boring things that there is on this planet. I'll link it to the description, and you guys can go check it out. So without further ado, let's get started on today's video. Hi, I'm Shane Adamson, and welcome to the yesphonics channel. This is where teachers, tutors, and educators everywhere come for valuable teaching information and insights. So today's topic is going to be about government programs and a program called Race to the Top, which was mandated by the federal government to schools for certain standards that they must uphold. And I've talked a little bit about Common Core in my previous videos, but today is going to focus primarily on the program Race to the Top and the flaws that's entailed within it. As with most government programs, Race to the Top has failed, and not just in the terms of helping children succeed in their educational endeavors, but it's also failed taxpayers and teachers. I should probably start by explaining what Race to the Top is and where it came from. In 2009, the Obama administration offered $5 billion to schools who adopted what is known as Common Core standards. And this was an effort by the federal government to double down on its previous failed program known as the No Child Left Behind, which was enacted by George W. Bush and his administration in the early 2000s. Essentially, Race to the Top is No Child Left Behind on steroids. The same tired old tactics being pushed, evaluating teachers based on student test scores with impossible standards to reach, and if they don't meet these standards, they just come in and fire all the teachers. Sounds like a winning plan if I ever heard one. The major difference between Race to the Top and No Child Left Behind is that the Race to the Top ushered in more federalized control and more punitive punishments. It promoted the theory that teachers needed harsher punishments and children needed more tests. Instead of states designing their own curriculum and making their own tests and being subject to the penalties of the federal government, they lost all control, save for 15%, which we'll get into in a second, of how they design their curriculum, and they are still subject to harsh penalties if they do not meet 100% of the federal mandated guidelines. And Race to the Top also required more funding. Lots more. And they have one thing in common, though. The federal government can still come in and fire, or as I like to put it in IGSOC, turn around. They have this great phrase called turn around, which is just code for firing teachers. They can fire every last teacher who does not meet the artificially mandated results. And my question is, how is this not Orwellian? One thing that really bothers me about Common Core standards that Race to the Top includes is that the program has created a longitudinal database of all students and their test scores. Now, this seems like a great idea on paper. Not really, but for the sake of the argument, let's just run with this, just for the sake of the point of view. But the stark reality is that, one, it's not effective at all. And two, this database isn't actually measuring any metrics that would actually be helpful. On the contrary, it's measuring teachers based on students that they've never taught and subjects that teachers aren't specializing in. It's also measuring teachers on which students attend their classes rather than which teacher was there actively teaching and doing a good job. You can plainly see where this is going. Race to the Top has also mandated that states adopt college and career-ready standards, whatever that means. But I think important questions need to be asked when ushering in something as complex as a national curriculum. Some of those questions might go as such. What is the race? Where is the top? Who will get there? Who will be left behind? Of course, most of these questions are rhetorical, especially when you start from a common sense position that holds that not every child is exactly the same. This is another instance where the federal government is meddling in the affairs that they have no business in. And I guess I could cue my cranky old man, my impersonation. Oh, that damn federal government.
Yeah.
Screwing around with that stuff I don't even in. The bottom line is that education isn't a race. That's doing education a disservice. Indeed, where is the top? I'm suspecting that the top is subjective at best. And most students will not get to the top, and many factors influence this, including IQ, diet, home life, unshared experiences, which is experiences outside of the home life, and their cultural environment. To bet that all or even most students will succeed in attaining this artificial standard is impossible. And lastly, a good majority of children will be left behind, and that's just what happens when you have central planning. And I'm sure some of you will say, see, this guy's just another anti-government nut who hates the thought of government improving education. But that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I'm actively helping children every day. Parents, teachers, and educators and students alike love our mnemonic phonic technique, which teaches the 72 order phonograms. And I just had to throw that little plug in there because if you guys haven't seen the mnemonic phonic technique, I'll link to in the description below to that so you guys can go start teaching phonics today. Now let me use an appeal to authority as well. Diane Ravitch, which I've talked about in my previous videos, has made a similar argument that I'm making right now. She uses one of the top authorities on Race to the Top and No Child Left Behind because she was instrumental in getting the legislation to pass, and now she regrets it wholeheartedly. Ultimately, Race to the Top is promoting a hyper-egalitarian approach to education. And there isn't anything wrong with egalitarianism inherently. But when your stated goal is to have every child succeed and the exact opposite is happening, perhaps you should rethink your strategy. Race to the Top is importing a corporate culture into education. It's promoting competition, bottom line, profits and losses, and bankruptcy for those that fail to show profits. Now, the only caveat I have here is that I think competition is a good thing, especially for young kids. It helps them integrate into the free market as successful humans. Competition is also a huge factor in products becoming better. However, all of the things that Race to the Top is importing via its semi-fascistic corporate culture is horrendous. This includes abrupt firing of employees, which would be teachers, that fail to meet targets, and bonuses for those that do. Education is about learning and questioning. It's about discovering what's around you and inquiring into things you're not very knowledgeable in. Ultimately, it's about development and growth, and to become a better person who can serve their local community in the most effective and joyful way possible. This includes learning to become a good citizen. Teachers need to have the freedom to foster good habits in their students, and this includes instilling a sense of personal responsibility in students for their actions. Ideally, children should be getting this from home, but unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. Unruly kids love learning to read. This is just a fact. And if you were to ask most teachers what their goals are as a teacher, most teachers would tell you that they want their students to succeed in every possible way. Part of this dream includes awakening a love for learning in their students and to promote self-discipline and ethical behavior as desired habits that their students can carry with them for a lifetime. Race to the Top acts as if test scores are the be-all, end-all, and inculcates the idea that these standards can't be questioned. It's totally one-sided. Race to the Top only measures test scores, but it fails to measure originality, creativity, kindness, persistence, diligence, and most of all, courage. Most importantly, it fails to measure the ability for students to critically think for themselves. But then again, I'm not so sure that the government wants to have this trait. If they did, why are they promoting such an outrageous ideology when an overwhelming majority of data is showing that their half-baked plan is failing? I would guess that it's because of their addiction to power, which, coincidentally, they found is the same level of addiction that cocaine addicts experience. Obviously, the answer to this headline is debt. The US currently is in the hole to the tune of $20+ trillion, along with $100 to $200 trillion, depending on who you talk to, of unfunded liabilities. Figures vary from source to source, so you guys can go investigate and see for yourself. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, though, to figure out that more funding isn't the answer. Now, I will digress for one moment and say that I would take more funding if they would just, de-escalate the war budget, maybe stop spending $500 billion every year on that. That'd be great. Maybe funnel a little bit of that towards education. I'd be all right with that. We've been doing this for a long time in many areas of education, and it's failing to garner legitimate results. Not to mention that the moral issue of forcing taxpayers at the point of a gun to pay for things that they can't isn't working and having no say in the matter. Now, I realize that may seem like a bit of hyperbole there, you guys, my analogy of using it at the point of a gun, but let's follow this to its logical conclusion. What happens if you don't pay your taxes? Well, first you get a nice letter in the mail, and then if you ignore that letter, then you get a few more letters that aren't as nice, and then if you ignore those, then you get men with guns coming to your door, and then what happens there? Well, if you resist arrest, if you don't comply, you don't go to court, what happens? Well, you're at the point of a gun, and things aren't going to end well. That's why I use that analogy, and it might seem extreme to some people, but it is the sad reality that we live in. The other and more direct problem with more funding is that it opens up education to a long line of vendors selling stuff that schools supposedly need, which usually they don't. Old-fashioned paper and pencil is really what they need, but I digress. And schools go along with this to meet new federal guidelines and to escape the sanctions that may be imposed upon them. So again, it's not for the good of the students. None of this is for the good of the students. A list of new things that schools supposedly need are as follows: turnaround specialists, learning coaches, race to the abyss rubrics to measure performance, data analysts, professional development workshops, experts in teacher evaluation, curriculum specialists, leadership trainers, new software and hardware, new programs and textbooks aligned with Common Core standards. All of this is a costly waste of time. Are you starting to see a trend? If the federal government mandates these artificial test scores and then requires teachers and schools to purchase all or some of the aforementioned things, doesn't it seem like it's a huge transfer of wealth to those who have vested interests in seeing Common Core succeed? All of these things are not aligned in the interests of children, much less teachers. All of this nonsense, insert the word Common Core, was the byproduct of close collaboration of the U.S. Department of Education and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In order for states to get funding, they had to adopt principle of teacher evaluations. Dozens of states went for the bait, and almost all of the states changed their laws to be in accordance with Common Core standards. Meanwhile, there was absolutely no evidence to support evaluations for teachers. But the Gates Foundation promoted this approach by offering multi-million-dollar grants to a few districts to demonstrate test-based accountability. Test-based accountability failed everywhere it was tried. Kind of reminds me of communism. Heyo. Researchers pointed out time and time again that this approach was ineffective. Teachers who taught English as a second language, challenged or disabled, troubled, and gifted students were less likely to see their test scores rise compared to those teachers who taught in affluent suburbs. Again, this is why artificial mandates always fail. They never take into account the complex inner workings of individuals. As if the whole program couldn't get any worse, it does. Race to the Top mandated the rating of teachers for students they had never taught and subjects they had never taught as well. Let that sink in for a second. 70% of teachers didn't teach reading or mathematics grades 3 through 8. What's even more stunning is the fact that hardly anybody knew whether or not teachers who were fired or given bonuses were deserving in either respect. This made test scores even more godlike in the eyes of bureaucrats than they were in No Child Left Behind. I'm sure some of you are wondering how the U.S. Department of Education could be so moronic. I'm kind of wondering the same thing, but as it turns out, there is an answer. A coalition of inside the Beltway groups decided that national standards and national tests would create a dynamic and coherent realignment of public education. They thought that national standards and tests would bring about better everything, including technology, teacher education, professional development, teacher evaluations, promotional and graduational standards, and better textbooks. It didn't happen. As a matter of fact, the exact opposite happened. A hodgepodge of nightmares. In the early 1990s, it was called systemic reform. The theory held that the American system was too fragmented and decentralized to be effective. I'm pretty sure I heard almost the same thing in The Thought Police in George Orwell's 1984. George H.W. Bush's administration funded voluntary national standards, hoping other parts of the model would align. They didn't. And for good reason. States were still smart and weren't quite as desperate for cash at that time. Then came along the Bill Clinton administration. Good old Mr. Clinton, who promised a national system of standards and assessments. That never happened. Another bullet dodged. But ultimately, freedom would have its day in court when George W. Bush came along and used No Child Left Behind to persuade states to write their own standards and tests. He also used it to penalize schools who didn't meet standards. Long story short, the Obama administration announced Race to the Top. But states were ineligible to compete for a share of $4.5 billion unless they adopted the aforementioned college and career-ready standards. States understood that it meant adopting Common Core standards even though the standards hadn't even been finished yet, and they would be sight unseen until they had already signed the dotted line. The 2008 financial crisis left most states in dire financial straits. But 5 states adopted the Common Core standards sight unseen. They got greedy for that cash money, baby. 18 states received funding. States were allowed to add a meager 15% of additional content to the Common Core standards. This is that aforementioned 15% that I talked about in the very beginning of the video, and we're going to address that now. In order to do that, they had to agree not to change the standards in any way, shape, or form. The U.S. Department of Education awarded $360 million to 2 consortia of states to write tests that were aligned with Common Core standards. This was unprecedented in American history. Previously, markets operated on a state-by-state basis, often more district-by-district, even more local, more autonomous, more transparent. The promotion of Common Core by the U.S. Department of Education and funding of national tests was legally questionable, as it turns out. Federal laws prohibit federal officials from attempting to direct or control curriculum. Ironically, Arne Duncan insisted that he had no role in directing, assisting, or promoting the direction of the curricula. But that's exactly what he did. The Obama administration and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation thought that they had pulled the wool over everyone's eyes. But it backfired almost immediately. There was a huge outcry over how the Common Core standards were devised. The Common Core standards were deliberated behind closed doors, lacked transparency, and lacked inclusion of stakeholders, and most damning of all, no revisions allowed. Ultimately, what schools really needed wasn't more testing and more punishment. They needed smaller classes, more experienced teachers, and health clinics. Instead, they were mandated more testing. The Obama administration and the DOE's Arne Duncan built on the cracked foundation of No Child Left Behind by transforming schools from humanistic, child-centered, community-oriented to shaped by ideas of interest of statisticians, economists, and entrepreneurs. We need to get back to a common sense place when it comes to education. The way things are being implemented and ran right now are a total disaster. The illiteracy rate is just as high as it ever was, and actually it's getting higher. One place we could start, as I've advocated for before, is the abolition of the Department of Education. Nowhere in the Constitution does it call for such an entity. After we disbanded that train wreck, we can proceed by giving them back freedom to the states by letting them choose which curriculum that they want to use. They can choose a curricula that has actually been proven to work, not some pie-in-the-sky bureaucratic dream. After we've given the freedom of choice back to the states and districts, the final thing we need to do is abolish national tests and standards and repeal Common Core. It's really that simple. I really don't care about looking like I'm helping children. I actually care about helping children. Even more so, I don't care about looking like I'm helping teachers. I actually want to help teachers. If the American school system is to recover from the death spiral that it's in, we need to take swift, comprehensive measures to ensure her recovery. Time to give teachers back their autonomy. Time to tell bureaucrats to back up and step down. In order for America to be innovative, we need to have innovation and critical thinking students. We don't have any time to waste. In order for America to be innovative, we need to have innovative, critical thinking students. And the simple fact of the matter is that's slowly coming to an end. We need action, and we need it now. And that's it for today's video, folks. Thank you so much, my fellow educators. I know this is a long one, but I really appreciate you sticking in and sticking it out with me. Let me know your thoughts and your concerns below in the comment section. Give this video a like. It was a bit more of a serious topic, but it's things that need to be talked about. It's one of those problems that if it's not addressed, then it's going to continue to be an issue. So with that being said, much love to all my fellow educators. Be well, stay classy, and I'll catch you in the next video.